If you're learning German, you have probably come up with some grammar terminology that makes no sense to you whatsoever, and it might be impeding the way that you learn the German language. What's a tense? What is a mood? Do nouns have moods, or do they have tenses, or do they have cases, or what is all of this stuff, and what does it actually mean? Well, in the next several videos on Wednesdays, I will be teaching you some terminology that can help you a lot whenever you're trying to learn German. Hopefully this will clear up some of the muddy waters that we have in grammatical jargon. Today we're going to be talking about what a tense is, and I will give you examples of every single tense you need to know in German. A tense is a grammatical code. This tells us when something occurs, whether it is occurring currently, or it has already occurred, or it will occur in the future. Traditionally, tenses are illustrated through verbs. There are also ways to use other words other than verbs to indicate when something is happening and change the tense without actually changing the tense of the verb. But as a general rule, if you want to change the tense of a sentence, you need to start by looking at the verb. Now I'd like to go over a list of the different tenses in German and show you some examples of each one so that you realize how they are used both in English and how they are used in German. I'll be doing these in the order that most German learners will learn them, which means that once I get to a certain point and it's overly complicated for you, you can just shut this video off. But if you think you can still keep up, go ahead and watch this all the way to the end where we get to the really complicated stuff. For simplicity's sake, I will be sticking to the indicative mood, and if you don't know what a mood is, wait until next week where I will be teaching you what a mood is. I only mention this because there are some grammar nerds out there who are going to tell me in the comments that I missed out on this, that, or the other thing because I didn't talk about things that were not in the indicative mood. So, we are going to stick to the indicative mood, and we are not going to talk about anything else until next week when I actually talk about moods. The first tense that most German learners learn about is the present tense. This is the one that almost every German textbook will start out with. It'll show you the way that you say things in the present tense. This is used whenever something is occurring or started in the past but is still continuing into the present tense in German. In English it's a little bit different because we have what we call a progressive tense, which means that we can have things that are currently happening or things that reoccur throughout time. So in other words, I play baseball. If I play baseball right now, it's I am playing baseball. That's the progressive tense. If it's just I play baseball, it's that I currently am enrolled in some sort of team or league or something like that that plays baseball, but I'm not necessarily doing it right this second. In German, we use the exact same tense for both of these occasions. We just use a little bit of extra adverbs or adjectives to explain when specifically this thing is happening, if we need to. Here are a couple of examples of how this looks in action. Ich habe seit 1975 einen Bruder. I have had a brother since 1975. This action happened in the past but is continuing into the present tense. In English, we just use the past tense. In German, however, I currently still have a brother and therefore we use the present tense. Ich kaufe einen Hund. I am buying a dog. This is currently happening. In English, we would use the present progressive. Ich schwimme. I am swimming. Currently happening again. This one in the English, we use the present progressive tense again. Ich schwimme jeden Tag. I swim every day. It's happened in the past and will happen again in the future, and so we assume that this is going on in the present. The formation of the present tense in German is only using one verb, unless of course there is a modal auxiliary, which I've talked about in the 3 Minuten Deutsch series that I have over here on my channel. The verb is conjugated with an ending to fit the pronoun. All tenses will do this, but the present tense follows this pattern. Ich, du, st, sie, t, wir, en, ihr, t, sie, and sie, en. This pattern is similar in other tenses, but is never exactly the same. There are, of course, irregular verbs and modal auxiliaries that don't really follow these rules of conjugation, or they simply use a modified version of this pattern. But in general, you'll find that this rule works pretty well. If you want to know more about the present tense, you can watch my earlier videos of the 3 Minuten Deutsch series, which is linked in the description and over there in the corner. The second tense that most German students will encounter is the future tense. This tense shows that something has not yet occurred but will happen at some point in the future. This can be done in two ways. As I mentioned before, you can imply certain tenses by using additional words in a sentence to show that the tense has changed. The future tense is one of those tenses, and it's actually done most often this way in German as opposed to the other way that I'll talk about here in a minute. In order to form the future tense without learning anything new, you can simply use a present tense form of the verb and then add a time element into the sentence that indicates that this thing has not yet occurred. For example, Ich kaufe morgen einen Hund. I am buying a dog tomorrow. The same thing is done in English. We use the present progressive tense used with a time element to indicate that this has not yet happened. Wir spielen 3 Uhr. We are playing at 3 o'clock. Again, present progressive plus an extra time. You can also form the future tense in German using the verb werden, which is an irregular verb plus an infinitive of another verb. This happens in English as well. We use the verb will in the future tense and an infinitive of an additional verb. An infinitive is the base form of the verb. This is the form that you'll find in the dictionary or the form that has not been changed in any way. In German, the infinitive goes at the end of the sentence. Ich werde einen Hund kaufen. I will buy a dog. This allows you to not use a time element if you don't really feel like it. It just says, I will buy a dog. We don't know when, but it's going to happen in the future. Wir werden spielen. We will play. If you want more information about the future tense, I've got a 3 Minuten Deutsch episode for that, and I've also got that linked in the description and over here in the corner. The third tense that German learners usually use is the present perfect tense in English, even though that really isn't the equivalent in German, we just call it the Perfekt in German. This is used to talk about things that happened before the current time, i.e. past tense. In English it's a bit more complicated, but in German the general rule is that you use the Perfekt when speaking. There's another past tense that we'll get to here in a minute that is used when writing. In order to make the Perfekt, you need to start with either a form of haben or sein, which goes at the verb spot, like where you would normally put a verb in the present tense. The main verb then goes to the end of the sentence as a past participle. These usually look like the original verb with a GE in the front and a T instead of an EN at the end of the verb. There are a bunch of verbs that take an EN instead of a T at the end, and there's also a bunch of verbs that are irregular, which means that their stems don't look like the infinitive. But you get the general idea here. Here are a few examples. Ich habe einen Hund gekauft. I bought a dog. Wir haben gespielt. We played. The next tense on my list is the simple past, or in German we call it the Imperfekt. This tense is used to express time like the Perfekt does, but this is usually used with writing. As the name implies, this tense is simple, in that it only uses one verb at a time, no infinitives, and no past participles at the end. If the verb is regular, the endings of the verb follow the same pattern as the present tense did, but with a bit of a twist. This means that the endings are ich, te, du, test, sie, te, wir, ten, ihr, tet, sie, and sie, ten. If the verb is irregular, ich and RZS forms don't get an ending at all, and the rest of the forms follow the exact same pattern as they did in the present tense. Ich spielte Fußball. I played soccer. Regular verbs in English follow the ed ending pattern. Wir gingen ins Kino. We went to the movies. Irregular verbs in both German and in English just simply have to be memorized because their stems don't make any sense. There is also a tense that the Germans call Plusquamperfekt, which is either the Pluperfekt or the past perfect in English. This is one that's formed by the simple past form of haben or sein and the past participle of the other verb at the end of the sentence. I jokingly call it the double past in class whenever I teach this because it's a combination of the Perfekt and the Imperfekt, and it's used for past events that happened before other past events. Nachdem ich ins Bett gegangen war, schlief ich bald ein. After I had gone to bed, I soon fell asleep. Notice that in English we use the past tense of have, had, and then change the past tense go to gone. So again we're using two past tenses in English as well. Der Junge ging nach Hause, nachdem Deutsch in der Schule gelernt hatte. The boy went home after he had learned German in school. The last tense on my list is the future perfect, and as the name implies, this is the future tense that is used when the action has not been completed, but will be completed later after you have done another event. This is formed whenever you use the future tense verb werden, as it would happen in the first future tense, but then we use the infinitive of haben or sein and a past participle of another verb. The past participle and the infinitive haben or sein go to the end of the sentence with haben or sein at the very end. Ich werde Deutsch gelernt haben. I will have learned German. The English again is very similar. Here we have a form of will, same as we did in the other future tense, and we have a form of have, and we have a form of learn, which is in this case learned, which is again the past tense. Wird seine Hausaufgaben gemacht haben, bevor Computerspiele spielt. He will have done his homework before he plays computer games. Well, if you have made it this far into my video, congratulations, you now know a very tiny bit of information about each of the German tenses when they're used in the indicative mood. This covers most of the forms of verbs that you're going to find in the German language. There are still moods to cover which also change verbs in a very specific way, but those are going to come up next week. Most of these tenses I have covered in other videos in the 3 Minuten Deutsch series or in my previous videos that I did for my German students. If I have not covered one of those yet, I will be covering those soon. I'm going to keep talking about the tenses and other moods and stuff like that in Wednesday videos for a while, and eventually I will get to this in the 3 Minuten Deutsch series. If you have any more confusion about these tenses or comments or whatever, leave those down below. Otherwise, that's all I've got for today. Das ist alles für heute. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss.